The brain doesn't always take the rational approach. The person who forgot your name probably thought about the conversation you had afterward. They remember what you said about your sister or the specific way you laughed at something. Maybe you had an odd take that stuck with them. They were there. They were just, not quite there for the name part. And this is the thing about memory that most people fundamentally misunderstand. It's not a recording. Your brain doesn't store experiences the way a hard drive stores files. It stores impressions, emotions, patterns, fragments, and it prioritizes ruthlessly. High emotion stored. Surprising, stored. Connected to something you already know, stored. One arbitrary syllable handed to you at the exact moment you were busy trying to seem normal in front of a stranger. Good luck. People who forget names easily often have something else in common. They tend to be highly associative thinkers. Their memory is richly contextual. They remember stories and feelings. The look on someone's face when they said something that mattered. Ask them what someone was wearing at a party 3 years ago. They might actually tell you. Ask them the name of the person standing next to them, blank, because their brain was cataloging everything except the label. This isn't a flaw in the mind. It's just a particular architecture, one that is frankly better suited to storytelling, to emotional attunement, to the kind of listening that makes people feel genuinely understood, and worse suited to the specific mechanical task of holding and remembering what someone was called under social pressure. There's a term researchers use for this specific breakdown: the name-face discrepancy. Decades of memory studies have shown that people are dramatically better at recalling a person's occupation than their name, even when both pieces of information are presented in the exact same sentence, at the exact same time, with the exact same effort. Why would that be? Because a name is what psychologists call arbitrary information. There's no logical bridge between the sound Kevin and the actual human being standing in front of you. Nothing about his face predicts his name. Nothing about his personality echoes it. It's a label bolted onto a person from the outside, disconnected from everything else you're learning about him in that moment. An occupation, on the other hand, comes preloaded with meaning. Tell someone he's a baker, and their brain instantly recruits a whole network of associations. Flour, early mornings, warmth, the smell of bread. That single word lands on fertile ground. A name lands on nothing. It has no texture to grip onto, so your memory, quite reasonably, lets it slide. There's also the matter of what's happening inside you in the exact moment someone tells you their name. Usually, it's not a calm moment. You're managing eye contact. You're thinking about your own introduction. You're monitoring how you're coming across. That's a lot of cognitive real estate being spent on self-presentation. And self-presentation is expensive. It eats directly into the mental bandwidth you'd otherwise use to encode incoming information. This is sometimes called the next-in-line effect. Researchers first noticed it in situations where people go around a room introducing themselves. Interestingly, the person about to speak next tends to remember almost nobody who spoke right before them because they were too busy rehearsing what they were about to say. Meeting someone new works the same way. You're often quietly rehearsing your own next line, while theirs goes in one ear and out the other. None of this means you shouldn't try to get better at it, by the way. Repeating someone's name back immediately when you meet them, connecting it to a visual or a person you already know. These things work, and they work because you're doing manually what your brain refuses to do automatically. Building the association that wasn't there. You're essentially constructing a little bridge between Kevin and something that already has a place in your mental landscape. Maybe Kevin reminds you of your cousin Kevin, so you picture them standing side by side. Maybe his name rhymes with something absurd, and that absurdity is exactly what makes it stick, because the brain remembers what's strange far more readily than what's ordinary. There's also a simpler, almost embarrassingly practical fix. Attention. Genuine, undivided attention in the first 3 seconds of hearing a name. Not attention you perform, but attention you actually give. Most people don't forget names because their memory is broken. They forget because they never really heard the name in the first place. They were nodding. They were already halfway into their own response. But the shame spiral, the quiet, low-grade belief that forgetting names makes you an uncaring person, someone who moves through the world without really registering other people, that part is wrong. And it's worth saying clearly because a lot of people carry it without ever examining where it came from or whether it's actually true. Consider for a moment how selective attention actually works under stress. When you're nervous, even mildly, your visual and cognitive focus narrows. It's an old survival mechanism built for scanning a threat, not for absorbing arbitrary syllables. Your ancestors needed to notice a predator's movement in the grass, not memorize what to call it. Names are a wildly recent invention layered on top of a much older, much blunter machine. There's an interesting wrinkle here too. The people who are best at remembering names aren't necessarily the ones with the sharpest overall memory. Often, they're the ones who've simply decided, consciously or not, that names matter enough to earn dedicated effort. It's less a talent and more a habit. Repeated so many times, it starts to look like natural ability. And here's something worth sitting with. The anxiety about forgetting a name can itself become the reason you forget it. The moment you think, I really hope I remember this, you've just diverted a chunk of your attention away from actually listening and toward monitoring your own performance. It's a strange trap, self-defeating by design, and almost everyone falls into it at some point. There's also a cultural layer to this that rarely gets discussed. In cultures and workplaces where people meet dozens of new faces a week, networking events, conferences, large team environments, the sheer volume of introductions can overwhelm anyone's encoding capacity, regardless of how socially attuned they are. It's not a personal failing. It's an information bottleneck, the same one that would trip up a supercomputer if you fed it 50 unrelated data points in 90 seconds. It's worth noting, too, that this tends to shift with age, though not in the direction people assume. It isn't simply decline. Older adults often have more names competing for the same mental shelf space, decades of accumulated Kevins and Sarahs and Davids, all sounding vaguely similar, all crowding the same retrieval pathway. It's less that the door to memory closes and more that the room behind it gets fuller every year. Let's talk about the flip side for a second, because it matters just as much. What does it feel like to be the person whose name was forgotten? There's a particular sting to it, a small, quiet sense of being unmemorable, even when you know rationally that it isn't personal. That sting is worth acknowledging honestly, because pretending it doesn't exist doesn't make it easier for anyone. But here's a gentler way to hold that feeling. Being forgotten by name rarely means being forgotten by substance. Most people, if you actually pressed them, couldn't tell you your name, but could tell you exactly what you talked about, how you made them feel, whether the conversation was easy or effortful. The name is the file label. The rest of you is the actual file, and the actual file usually survives just fine. There's a practical takeaway buried in all of this, and it's simpler than most productivity advice pretends memory tricks need to be. If a name matters to you, say it out loud within the first few seconds, not robotically, not as a memorization drill, just naturally, folded into the conversation. Good to meet you, Sarah. That single act of speaking it does more for retention than almost any other single technique. Another small trick, and it sounds almost too simple to work. Ask a follow-up question that requires using the name again shortly after you hear it. So, Sarah, how long have you been doing this? That second repetition, spaced out just slightly from the first, is what memory researchers call spaced retrieval, and it's one of the most reliable tools we have for making fragile information durable. None of this requires becoming a different kind of person. You don't need to overhaul your entire cognitive style to remember more names. You just need a few small, deliberate habits layered on top of who you already are. An associative thinker, a story rememberer, someone whose mind is simply optimized for something other than labels. You are not absent or dismissive. You are someone whose brain prioritizes differently, gets hijacked by its own internal weather, and sometimes fails at the single least interesting thing about a person. The arbitrary sound their parents assigned them before they'd done a single thing worth remembering. The name was always the least of it. What you remember about people, the real stuff, the texture of who they are, that part, that's still there. That's been there the whole time. If you're interested in exploring some of these ideas further, I've put together a collection of books that dive deeper into psychology, human behavior, and independent thinking. You can find the full list on my bookshop page through the link in the description and pinned comment. And if you enjoy content like this, consider subscribing and turning on the notification bell so you don't miss future uploads.